What's up, everybody? This is Steve from Bloom Audio. Today we've got the Vision Ears VE10. VE10 is the latest release from German IEM makers Vision Ears, and it's their first non-limited release for quite a while. Recently, we've gotten their collaboration with Astel & Kern, the Aura, and a limited edition version of the Phoenix that came after the regular edition of the Phoenix, their current flagship. And VE10 takes a lot from those last few releases and refines it really well into something pretty surprising. Is VE10 basically their new flagship at $1,000 less than their current flagship? Let's take a closer look. VE10's a great looking IEM, has an aluminum shell, very well constructed, very stylish, kind of unique contours on there. In terms of the fit and comfort, Vision Ears made some pretty big improvements here. While we loved EXT and Phoenix, EXT in particular had a lot of challenges with the fit. Phoenix similarly had a really wide nozzle that some people had a hard time getting aligned correctly. So we did some measurements and found that the EXT's nozzle was 7.4 millimeters and the Phoenix was 6.3, along with just some general bulk there. VE10, a little bit more of an ergonomic design and brings that nozzle size down to 5.5 millimeters, which basically means it's going to be a lot more comfortable, fit a much wider range of listeners. And if you've been paying attention to this sort of flagship $3,000, $4,000 space, you may have noticed a lot of IEMs getting bigger as they add more drivers, more advanced crossovers, and all of that. VE10 is a great option if you need something. It's going to be an easier fit, not a super wide nozzle, not a super huge shell for VE10. The included cable is great. It's a silver-plated OCC copper. The look, the feel is all really high quality, the sort of thing you should expect in a $3,000 IEM. And you can expect that typical really high level of attention to detail, great quality in the full package you get with VE10 as well. In terms of specs, VE10 is a 10-driver hybrid, a 5-way crossover. You have one 8mm dynamic driver for the bass, 2 dual balanced armatures covering the mid-low, 2 covering the mid, 2 covering the mid-highs, and then 1 super tweeter for the ultra-high range. Sensitivity is 114.7 dB, and the impedance is 8.4 ohms. With that high sensitivity and the 8.4 ohm impedance, these are very sensitive. You should be able to use them with virtually any device and not have any issue driving them in terms of volume. You'll just need to be careful with the output impedance of your device to make sure you don't generate any of that hiss, waterfall sound that very low impedance IEMs are sensitive to. So now, assuming that you won't have too many problems getting it into your ear, how does VE10 sound? Now, I've been known to ramble about IEMs for 15, 20 minutes, maybe more if you just set me loose and don't have an editor. So if I had to distill VE10 sound down into more of an elevator pitch than an overlong YouTube video, I would say the key factors are a really natural, lifelike presentation, impeccable tonal balance, just a general sense of accuracy and resolution. In the bass, you've got that great, deep linear extension along with a hard-hitting mid-bass, but as you transition that up into the mid-range, you don't feel any bloat there. You feel a natural sort of warmth, but great clarity throughout. There's a great sense of detail in bass instruments, the pluck on an upright bass, or that, grit and texture in an overdriven bass guitar, or synthesized bass instruments and that sort of things. And as you come up into the mid-range, you have the clarity there. You have some degree of separation that keeps that from bleeding up into the mids, giving you, great natural details in the mids Really solid vocal presentation all around. Both male and female vocals tended to just cut through the mix, give you great articulation in the vocals, and then moving up into the treble, the sense of breath in there was great as well. VE10 has a sort of textbook treble. You get all the fundamentals there, great sense of resolution and speed, elements like cymbals crashing, or there's just those high emotional notes in a violin or electric guitar solo. You get that little bit of bite there, but it's never too much, doesn't become fatiguing. And so when you start, listening for the imaging, the placement, the sense of space there, all these elements come together really well because you have that separation, you have a little bit of air that lends to that sense of wideness in the space. You get a great three-dimensional image, a great placement, and a great weight to the image as well. Instruments, voices, it all feels weighty and real. Just a really well-constructed sound stage. It doesn't feel overdone or overly blown out. It's not exaggerated in the wideness, and the separation doesn't feel exaggerated either. There's a good blend there where you have some cohesion, again, that realism and natural feeling, but you also have a clean separation that nothing feels muddled or that anybody's like standing on top of each other in the mix. So with VE10 kind of kicking off 2024 here, we wanted to bring in a couple of our 2023 favorites for comparison to see where VE10 really fits in. If you watched our 2023 wrap-up video, we had a lot of praise for the 64 audio Volur. Incredible bass, incredible imaging, brings together a lot of the best of what 64 audio can do. And if you've had a conversation with me about my favorite IEMs, you probably know the Fur Audio Radon 6 is right at the top of my list. So considering VE10 hits at $3,000, right in between the $2,500 Volur and the $3,300 Radon 6, thought these would make a great comparison. Part of what makes this comparison interesting is all three of these really do hit around the same space. All have some strong imaging elements. All three sort of balance that sort of powerful bass that's really needed for modern music with just enough control to not have that bass get in the way for classical music or even a lot of older classic rock and jazz recordings where that bigger bass can feel bloated. And all three combine those imaging characteristics and tonal balance with just excellent detail retrieval and resolution. Now the overall bass king for me was Radon 6. Just the level of slam and physicality and the sensation that you get with that kinetic bass especially if you have those in right with proper tips and all of that, is still second to none for me. Volur does have a little bit more sub-bass extension, so especially with electronic recordings or some modern soundtrack stuff like a Hans Zimmer soundtrack where you use a combination of orchestral and electronic instruments, you get that deep sub-bass where Volur does get a chance to shine there. VE10 felt somewhere in between. It didn't quite hit the depth as hard as Volur, nor did it have the overall slam like Radon 6. It kind of had a balance of it to it. Hit harder in the mid bass than Volur, had a little bit more sub bass potentially than Radon 6, but didn't quite have the standout nature of the bass on either of those, instead having a balance there. In the mid-range though, VE10 feels thicker and weightier than Volur does, and feels a little bit cleaner than Radon 6. While Radon 6 does largely keep that big powerful bass out of the way of the mid-range details, did feel like it was getting in the way just a little bit more than VE10 did. So VE10 had that thickness, had the weight, had the impact, but also had a little more clarity than Radon 6. VE10 has a similar treble to Radon 6, where again, there's that focus on the fundamentals of the treble, getting all the elements right. Volur adds a little bit of extra upper treble, which can be a bit fatiguing for some, but it adds to the sense of space. Where in terms of the overall width of the soundstage, I felt Volur was the winner here. Really presents a big spacious stage, a really strong sense of separation. Where Radon 6 and VE10, their sound stages aren't small by any consideration, just not as wide as Volur. However, VE10, I think maybe even a little more than Radon 6, has a stronger weight. And again, that reach out and touch somebody sort of imaging, where Volur is just a little bit more diffuse in that larger space. So again, coming back to that idea of being natural with a strong sense of realism, along with that overall tonal balance, that's where VE10 kind of stands out here. There are definitely some elements I love about Radon 6 that VE10's not going to match that physical, visceral feeling of the bass there, and it's not going to match the sheer size and space in Volur soundstage. But the balance there, especially if you're thinking of like a desert island sort of IEM, really makes VE10 a standout here. We've been pretty big fans of the sort of dedication to the craft of earphones that Visioneers has demonstrated in their whole lineup. Looking at Phoenix, Aura, EXT, and now VE10, you can see that unique identity that goes into each one, the unique design elements that make them all special. What really makes VE10 stand out to me, though, is how it feels like a refinement of all of those ideas. It grabs elements of Phoenix and of the limited edition and of EXT, puts them together in a way that doesn't feel like a mishmash of weird ideas. It feels like it really just captures the strength of all of them, from the resolution and balance of the Phoenix, while smoothing out some of the top end from the LE, but a little bit more of that fun and engagement from the EXT. Brings all these elements together into just absolutely incredible IEM. Just a release that belongs in the conversation with the flagship, absolute top of the line IEMs on the market. Thanks for watching. You can check out VE10 and a lot of other great products at bloomaudio.com. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll be back soon with more high fidelity audio content.